Hi, this is Marjohn Love, and this is Marjohn's Musings. And today's show is a bit more serious than the last couple. We're going to talk about some subtle and complex ideas. Some of the things I'm going to be discussing are a bit disturbing. If you're one of my fans who's told me that you love my voice and you record my show to help put you to sleep at night, you might want to go back and listen to the bread show again, or possibly the show about trees. If you're one of the people that loves to laugh at me, go play the woman's show. Today's show is about a very old idea in a modern context. The Latin is posse comitatus, and I'm not even going to pretend that I know how to spell that or say it correctly. What it was about was a bill to protect citizens of the United States of America from having militias or armies act as police. The reason that that's pertinent today is this last Monday there was a bombing in Manchester, England. It was a terrorist bombing. Many young women were wounded and quite a few were killed coming out of a concert in Manchester. Because of these terrorist attacks, and some of them that we're very familiar with, 9/11, are devastating horrors, there are now emergency procedures in place where the military becomes the governing arm of the judicial branch in the streets. The military take over the function of the police force. At times of crisis, earthquake, flooding, hurricane, forest fires, natural disasters, invasions, this is a vital ability for a country to be able to switch gears and put their fighting men and their first responders out on the line to protect the citizenry. But there's a hazard to the use of that power, because there's a distinct difference between being a soldier, like my husband, and being a peace officer, a police officer, like my brother-in-law, Steve. A soldier, a fighting soldier, the gun-carrying sort, is taught to seek the enemy and destroy. A police officer is taught to protect and to serve. A military person, be they Air Force, Navy, Marines, or Army, even the Coast Guard, have the mandate that when a situation calls for it, they can and do use lethal force. They can kill. They are granted immunity from the Fifth Commandment because a pursuer, an attacker, needs to be brought down for the safety of the innocent. It's the old biblical idea of the wolf in with the lambs. And the shepherd needs to get rid of the wolf or he'll lose his flock. And so the military are taught that they can and do use lethal force. The police force, on the other hand, are a different breed. And in our modern world, there's a hiring preference in police forces all over the world for ex-military. Young men who have served in the military, who are big, buff, tough, and are not going to flinch or back down in a crisis. But sometimes military men serving as peace officers have this violent history, and their instinct in a confrontation can be to use excessive force. The term for that is police brutality. If you have a very strong stomach and you can cope with deeply distressing imagery, there's an interesting video that's still available at the moment called The Gray State. It documents all sorts of distressing things going on currently in the United States or because of U.S. people in the world. Now, I need to make perfectly clear, I am not now, nor have I ever been, a libertarian. But the libertarians are interested in some of the same facets of our democracy and our economy and our military complex and our system of life that I'm interested in. So although the tenet of the libertarians that the United States was ruined by income tax is a tenet I do not hold. I believe income tax helped us build the entire national highway system, the Delaware Water Gap Project, the Hoover Dam. I believe in a community that puts the entire community before individual profiteering. Like I told you before, during the last election, I backed Bernie Sanders. Not because I agreed with everything he said, but because having a young man who's a college graduate, I was acutely aware of the debt load that our students come out of college to face. I think educating the public is of paramount importance. So, passe comitatus, the separation of the military from the peace officers. It was passed into law under President Rutherford B. Hayes on June 18, 1878. In law, through the legislative branch of our government, it was substantially weakened, and some people say actually overturned, in 2012 under the last administration. It's a matter of grave concern. For my father's generation and any Jewish immigrants whose parents and grandparents fled Nazi occupation, living under martial law was a nightmare. And being detained by military forces or even police forces, incarceration was a fact of daily life. In England, the judicial system back in the day when we were settling this country was based on the idea that if you were apprehended, you must have been doing something wrong. You were guilty until you could prove yourself innocent, which is very difficult to do if you're incarcerated. I think of all the refugees from Syria that are now in refugee camps, which in many ways are very similar to concentration camps. These things have an arc from the mildest to the most severe, and the arc travels through space and time. I am so proud of the people of Manchester, England, for coming right back out and going to work and walking the streets and standing proud and saying we will not be cowed, even during a period of martial law. One young man stated, "Well, I live here. This is my home. As long as the military force behaves itself with decorum and uses ethical rules of engagement for short periods of time in a crisis, the military in the streets of a civilian population is acceptable. But living day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year, under military occupation is such a hazard and a strain that people have actually died from it." That brings me to the recent firing of James Comey. Now, most of you have heard over the radio or on TV news or in a newspaper, magazine, and e-zine that the United States Director of the FBI was fired by the current President of the United States. There's an idea called area of purview. As a society, we assign duties and responsibilities to different people and different branches of our government. And write in the policies, the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation works at the pleasure of the chief executive officer. And those of you who are young may not understand all the references back to Richard Milhouse Nixon. But suffice it to say, under the threat of impeachment, Richard Nixon resigned. In our modern era, I don't know if that would have occurred. He was accused, and his fall guy, Ollie North, was convicted of being involved in a break-in where medical records were stolen to disparage a competitive candidate. And because they were psychiatric records, the other candidate was deemed unfit to serve, and it gave this particular administration an undue advantage in the electoral process. Now, after Bernie was no longer in the last political election, I was left with either Hillary Clinton, who's a very capable, competent woman, or Donald Trump, who says things that put the hair on the back of my neck up. I did an entire show about all the women in the pink hats protesting having their genitals referred to as a vernacular for a cat. To have the Chief Executive Officer of the United States of America show that much flagrant, blatant disrespect to my gender was offensive to me. That was months ago. We're now at the very end of May. We've almost completed 6 months of this particular administration being elected and being sworn in and carrying out the business of government. Now, our founding fathers were very worried about the use of power. There's an old cliche that's still very apt. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Through history, we've seen that in empires run by an emperor and an empress, in religious institutions like the early Catholic Church, which at one point had the bastard son of a prior pope sit as pope, because there was the divine rule of kings, the right to rule bequeathed on a certain person by the clerics of the religions. There were wars fought over this. And if there is a system of finances, churches, synagogues, mosques, temples ask, cajole, wheedle, demand, abscond funds. When I was a girl, there was a tithe. 1/10 of everything you made went to your religious denomination. That sounds like a great deal, but if you look at our taxation structure and you think of federal tax, state tax, real estate, which is a local municipal tax, sales tax, the unemployment insurance fees, Social Security retirement fees, you work for approximately 9 months of the year before you earn a penny for yourself. So what you see on your hiring documents that have your, what the military would call MOS, your mandate of service, the job description you are to follow, and how much you will be reimbursed. That may look really good on paper until you get your paycheck and you go to spend it and you go, wait a minute, what happened? Well, what happened was taxation. There are so many sorts of taxes now that it's sometimes confusing to understand them all and keep a grip on it. Our government was set up with checks and balances. We have a highly visible but somewhat vulnerable executive branch. If you don't believe me, there was an assassination attempt on Ronald Reagan. Because I'm very interested in universal health care, which is not the same as federally mandated for-profit health insurance. These are two different things. Universal health care is a commitment by a culture from birth to the grave to provide wellness education, safe food, clean water, vaccines that are safe to take, nutritious food, safe, clean, dry, warm, or cool housing, depending on the climate. You can die of cold. You can die of heat stroke. You can die of exposure if you're left wet or out in the snow. So shelter, clothing, food, the basic needs of the people. Security and safety, that brigands are not running around robbing everybody or murdering people or raping people. This is where the judicial arm of our government comes in. Under civilian law in the United States, up until the Patriot Act, a person had autonomy, personal security, and a sense that their life held the integrity of freedom. They could say what they want. They had freedom of speech. They could use their money to purchase goods and services. They were not told what they would buy. They could choose their place of employment. Ronald Reagan, who was the victim of an assassination attempt, they started the gun control bills back then when some of my viewers weren't even born yet. He did a speech against federal health care. And his main tenet was, because the population of the United States is volitional, we can go where we want, settle where we choose, build our homes, our businesses, our factories, till the earth, have our farms, raise domesticated animals where we wish, that population centers were dispersed, and if there was a federal health care system, doctors might be forced to move to areas they did not wish to go to provide service to rural communities. Anyone that lived in Poland or Czechoslovakia or Russia over the past 50 years will tell you there was a time that in grade school or high school they were told what occupation they would do and where they would perform that service. And so people of Ronald Reagan's generation didn't wish to give up their civil liberty to choose where they would live and where they would work. It was a valid point, but it made the dire need of impoverished infants and fragile elderly and people with chronic or progressive diseases who then died by the thousands every year due to lack of health care. That major issue was lost somehow. I listened to people comparing Richard Nixon's White House tapes. At that time, the President of the United States was recorded. And during conversations he did not fully comprehend, did not have cognizance were being recorded. Richard Nixon used colorful language. Like one of the purveyors of goods that I talk to you about sometimes is the Northern Sun. They have got a bumper sticker and a t-shirt that I was tempted to buy. It's all alphabet. OMG, GOP, WTF. And because the shirt refers to the F-bomb, and I try not to be crude, I didn't actually purchase it, even though I laughed when I saw it. And lately, I've been slapping myself in the forehead, quoting full rendition. My grandmother taught me rudimentary mathematics using dominoes. The lowest denomination is 0 over 0. There's nothing there. It's naught. It's a 0. It's interesting to me to remember that without our Muslim and Arabic brothers and sisters, we would not comprehend the 0. And much of modern math and the engineering that followed from it would not exist without a 0. The next denomination is 1 over naught. And you teach this to little children. Oh, see that dot? That's number 1. and you do number 2, and you do number 3, and about the time a baby turns 3 and grandma or auntie says, "And how old are you?" the baby will put up 3 fingers. They have learned something that grows into the practice of chism bop. Kind of an interesting thing. Google whack that. Chism bop. By the time someone's 4, the hand flies up. They're 4. And by the time they're 5, they reach the age where Hillary Clinton found out was the optimal time for an infant to separate from its mother. So in dominoes, we get a 2, and we get a 3, and we get a 4, and we get a 5, and we get a 6, and the highest card, if you think of them as tiles as cards, the highest card you can get on the working class set of dominoes is 6 over 6, what in dice is called boxcars. As a child, I used to love doubles, snake eyes. But as I got a little older, I tried to do dominoes as a mental exercise, and could I put a 6 to a 6, or a 1 to a 1? And because I was learning mathematics in 3rd grade, I got the dominoes out and I tried to match every number to every other number. And I discovered something fascinating. You couldn't do it. Not all the number combinations were in the set. And my grandmother said to me, well, that's because the commercial sets that most people can afford are small. They fit in a box not much bigger than this. She said you have to be wealthy to buy the entire box of dominoes. And then she taught me an expression. He's playing with a whole different deck. I didn't really understand. So she got a hold of a friend of hers and showed me that in some decks, and if you look, this domino is thicker than that one. And it also has a square shape. What was that? We didn't have them on our dominoes. Well, that's an 8. And this one, the square was filled in, and it was a 9. I was a little distressed about the domino game because I couldn't complete all the figures I wanted to complete. And she said, well, the manufacturer decides which dominoes go in the box, and you have to learn your set. It made me a little angry. All of a sudden I realized why the grown-ups in my house always beat me at dominoes. They had learned the set. They knew which tiles were available and which tiles were not. I felt cheated because as a little girl I had no idea which tiles were available. I only hoped that certain tiles would come to me. But no matter how much I wished for an 11 or a 12 or a 13, which is what this one is, I couldn't play a 13 because I did not have a rich person's set of tiles. As a matter of fact, rich people's children learn to visually recognize larger numbers than poor people's children. My grandmother taught me a rich man teaches his son, hire good, ethical people to work for you. A poor man teaches his son, find an intelligent, enterprising, fair, and honest man to work for. And what happens with that is you perpetuate socioeconomic roles. When I was in high school, I was tested for college preparedness. And my scores came out in such a way that the guidance counselor asked permission and got it to test me additionally. I came out 99th percentile in spatial relations and 97th percentile in mathematical reasoning. When my female adjusted scores were plotted against the boys. And the guidance counselor apologized to me that I could not go into engineering like my father because women were not accepted into engineering positions. So this attack in Manchester was at a concert that was frequented by young women and girls. I have an old CD here. It's not antique, it's 1999. So it is the last millennium. This is Sarah McLaughlin's CD, Mirror Ball. She's a very influential musician and songwriter. She had a couple of hits that changed the way people thought about the world. One of them was Adia. Adia, we were born innocent. We all falter. It doesn't matter. She was attacking the precept at the time of original sin, which was laid at the door of Eve, that women committed the first sin against God and were therefore culpable and to be punished and to be subjugated their entire lives to men. And that women were to be heterosexual and that they were to be housewives, mothers, nurses, teachers, laundress, seamstress, gleaner, farmer's wife, fisherman's wife. But they were not to be astrophysicists or the President of the United States. One of the pieces in Mirror Ball is titled Fear. Morning smiles like the face of a newborn child, innocent, unknowing. Winter's end, promises of a long-lost friend, speaks to me of comfort. Wind in time rapes the flower, trembling on the vine, and nothing yields to shelter from above. They say temptation will destroy our love, the never-ending hunger. But I fear I have nothing to give. I have so much to lose in this lonely place, tangled up in your embrace. So many women of my generation were taught that they were less valuable than their male counterparts. Little girls don't believe this when they're born. They have to be carefully taught. And if an extremist, suicide bomber with a bomb, can wound and murder dozens of people, and that results in the entire civic population being placed under martial law and house arrest, then the extremist wins. It's sort of like a Muslim version of the Mexican wisdom that I learned when I lived in San Diego. Male to another male getting married, quote, keep her barefoot and pregnant. Barefoot so she cannot run away. Pregnant so she's dependent and vulnerable. I find it amazing that the National Geographic chose this particular time to do an entire cover article on why we lie. They actually went through an exegesis of all the different types of lies, who does them, and how to spot them. It made me feel like the cover of The Sun for June 2017. It's a historic photograph of a group of people seeing a thriller with the first red and green 3D glasses, and they have not experienced this before. This is a new experience for them. They've never seen this, and images are jumping off the screen, and the one lady's like hanging on like, ah! And the people are screaming, people are laughing, people are stunned. I'll tell you something. This is May 2017, The Sun. And it's this beautiful doe. When I was a child, there was an expression for someone who was totally taken off guard. You look like a deer in the headlights. Elizabeth Warren. If you don't have a seat at the table, you are probably on the menu. So we talked about the executive branch, and we talked about the legislative branch, Congress, the House of Representatives, and the Senate. And we talked about the judiciary branch, which, if it doesn't get its act together, will not exist, because if the officer on the street can be the judge and jury and shoot the suspect on sight, not because of threat to life and limb, but as a choice. As a choice. I choose to shoot you and terminate your life. There is no need for jurisprudence. Why would you have a jury of your peers if you're dead? The invasion of privacy of the home via the internet, and the GPS in your car, and the GPS in your phone, and the fact that your phone is now a baby monitor in your house, and you do not know if or when you're being listened to. But there's another branch that we don't talk about. I try to tell you. It's called the fiduciary branch. And back in the day, it was an area of great debate among the founding fathers who insisted that money was a source of power, and biblically, it was the root of all evil. I'm holding Indian head pennies, thinking of Dakota and the water protection efforts. It's sort of like when a suburb comes in, clear cuts the forests, builds houses, and names the streets after the dead trees. But I don't think our founding fathers comprehended a future in which there was globalization of money. Not coinage money, not even the paper money. You know, Lincoln and Washington and Benjamin Franklin, that's not where the real money is. The real money is when you buy a house for $500,000 and you go into debt for 30 years of a mortgage, and the bank has you sign that paper, and that's the tip of the iceberg. There are instruments of exchange that move millions of dollars. It's sort of like the dominoes. Most people never get to play with a double 9. It's 18. It gives you a lot more than a 12. And I've tried to explain repeatedly that the banks who have no checks and balances because they were never federalized are doing a flat tax. Every time you open your pocket and pull out your phone and pay for a debt with your telephone, either your person or your merchant or service provider is whacked with a fee. It's called a POS, point of sale fee. If you use a card, you can opt for debit, meaning you have cash on account, or credit, meaning you're going to indebiture yourself. And the bank teaches you, if you do debit, cash on account, we'll charge your bank account $1, $2, $3, $4, even $5 every time you buy something. It's called a flat tax. We'll charge your bank account. And if you do credit, we'll pass the cost to the merchant or the service provider, who then raises the prices and sends them right back to you anyway. You pay either way, but you're being trained to indebit yourself. China just had its currency devalued because they're holding a whole lot of debt. This is how banking moguls can crash governments. Not just foreclose your house, foreclose your country. You don't believe me? Look up what's been going on the past 10 years in Greece and all the debate about the euro. There needs to be a federal check and balance on the fiduciary branch, because even though it's not officially recognized, like for years and years, the United States did business with Taiwan. They did not do business with mainland China. Richard Milhous Nixon said they have 6 soldiers to our every civilian. We can either feed them or fight them when they land here. Well, they landed here. Tiananmen Square happened in Washington, D.C., when a visiting ambassador's bodyguards took on protesters who were American citizens. I'm these ladies and gentlemen going, what is going on? And I think back to Barack Obama placing a Black History Museum on the Mall in Washington to look slavery in the eye. Enough heavy stuff. So let me tell you some fun things.
On Bradley Wharf, there's an old fishing shack. The original one blew down in the blizzard of 1978. But in the early 20th century, an art teacher by the name of Lester Hornby found that the fishing shack was such a popular motif for artists to paint that he declared it as motif number 1. So I found something really fun at motif number 1 day. My neighbor, Mary, and her friend, Sandra Kelly, wrote a book for little children called A Day in Rockport. Now, Sandy has spent a lot of time and energy getting this festival, motif number 1 day, off the ground. And the little book, A Day in Rockport, is available at the Paper Mermaid. Mary did all the beautiful illustrations. 2 that I found really fun were the church where I sing, which is referred to as the Old Sloop. And my favorite picture in the book reminded me of my dear old kitty. This one here looks like Newfie. At the end of the book of sunset over the harbor, which I thought was just gorgeous.
You know how I have Cantus sing my opening and my outro every show? Well, I got to go to the Cape Ann Symphony and hear the Cape Ann Symphony play Finlandia. And I've told you, I'm the person who drew the handicapped accessibility symbol, and I gave it to the movement out of a sense of altruism. I don't see a whole lot of that lately. And they featured as a soloist a blind pianist playing Grieg. My friend Tom lost his wife Mary. Mary was a bibliophile like me. She loved books. Tom must have read this one. It's called Clutter Control, because he donated 500 of Mary's books, each of which is available for $5, and the proceeds go to support Toad Hall, one of the few purveyors of pulp books. actual hold it in your hand, old-fashioned paper books. I found it fascinating that I had just done a whole show on trees and that I couldn't find the pen and ink drawings I wanted online to show the similarities between the structures of trees and the structures of nerves in the body. And Mary donated the National Audubon Society's Field Guide to Trees, and in this little volume are my pen and ink drawings of the trees. Now I have to find an old book of pen and ink drawings of nerve endings so I can show you the startling similarity between the trees that live in the skin of the earth and have their roots deep in what would be our dermis and their branches above the surface of the skin in what would be our hair. Trees are living entities that breathe in our carbon dioxide and breathe out the oxygen we need to survive. Gaia is a principle that the earth is a living organism in its own right. I've only got a couple of minutes left to talk to you. I really wanted to talk to you about this vocabulary workshop book I found at the upstairs of Toad Hall where the used books are. I'm there going through, and on page 18, it says, the nation was faced with a dilemma in which either to advance or retreat might endanger its vital interests. I found that absolutely apropos, a French word that means so appropriate. I love books on words, word power. And the very first unit, the fourth word, is circumspect. The second word is breach. The 19th word is spurious. But I wanted to share with you one of the resources that Mary kept with her during her battle with cancer. And it relates right here to Cape Ann, because we have the Emerson Inn. This is a quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Make the most of yourself, for that is all there is of you. I don't know that I believe that. I think my being is grounded in all that is. It's a slightly more pantheistic faith. But thinking of the Syrian refugees, I wanted to read you a very poignant quote. Think of all the beauty still left around you and be happy. And it shows a tree branch in the water. Anne Frank, a German diarist and fugitive of the Third Reich. You know how I love fortunes? The fortune for this show is diligence is the mother of good fortune. And since here on Cape Ann, we are a seaside community, I'd like to leave you with an anonymous quote, but a lovely image. Anyone can hold the helm when the sea is calm. I don't think our sea is calm right now. I think our ship estate is in a storm. If you have ideas, positive suggestions for what we can do as a community, get a hold of me at capeanntv.org. This is Marjohn, and this has been Marjohn's Musings.